The concept of the nice guy has always been pretty fascinating to me. If you reject someone and they immediately start insulting you, even if you have no idea who they are, it says much more about them than it does you. So I decided to do a deep dive into this concept and came to a very simple conclusion that the weakest people in society are those who present themselves as strong. And they have to present themselves this way, because if they don't, they'll drive themselves mad with self reflection. So let's start with a nice guy who does get rejected. Instead of accepting it, he immediately insults the woman. Well, you're ugly anyway, and I was just being nice. Or they start sewing together slurs and insults. And for everyone witnessing this interaction, they're thinking, what just happened? Well, what happened was he got embarrassed and could not handle those emotions. And the only way he could cope with those feelings was to try and make someone else feel those same emotions. And more importantly, he could not handle powerlessness. The rejection made him feel weak, and so he lashed out to feel that power again. Now, of course, this doesn't just apply to men, because we all feel weak at some point in our lives. And for most of us, it's better to have someone else in our lives that feel the same way. Because, as they say, misery loves company. But why? Theoretically, if we feel weak, we should lean on the strength of others around us to feel strong again. But according to Nietzsche, that is just not how humans work. On the Genealogy of Morals, Nietzsche distinguishes between two types of morality. Now, we're just going to focus on one today, but it is important to give a brief description of the competing one so that you can understand the contrast. The first is the master morality. People with this kind of morality are strong and self-affirming. They don't need someone else to tell them they're a good person, and praise isn't necessary. In fact, they tend to stand taller in the face of criticism, even if the criticism is right. And having people compliment them does not exactly push them to do better. They define good as what they are, powerful and confident. They don't need to defend themselves against others, but instead define themselves according to their own morality, even if that morality is flawed. Now, to be clear, these individuals are not holy art thou in Nietzsche's eyes. In fact, he saw all moralities as corruptible, and I could dedicate an entire video to this view of moralities, but today I just want to focus on the second. The slave morality is created, according to Nietzsche, by the weak. These people tend to react to the world instead of being proactive in their own lives. They can't be powerful themselves, so they redefine morality to make weakness virtuous and strength evil. They call the strong arrogant or oppressive, and they call their own powerlessness humility or niceness. And most importantly, they let outside events determine their behavior and impact their own morals. The nice guy operates on slave morality. He can't attract women through genuine confidence or charm, so he has to redefine the game. He defines himself as the nice guy, which really just means that he might be non-threatening. He frames more confident men as assholes and accuses women that reject him of being attracted to the bad boys. And when women actually choose those men, he reveals his resentment, or his deep, festering resentment of his own powerlessness. And the word resentment here is key. But Nietzsche uses a very specific term, ressentiment. It's French, and it means more than just ordinary resentment. Ressentiment is a specific kind of impotent rage that comes from a feeling of powerlessness and being unable to admit to it. It's not the clean anger of someone who's been wronged and can fight back. It's the poisonous, festering rage of someone who literally cannot and knows it. So instead of directing that energy towards improving themselves, they redirect it towards hating those above them. When you're powerless and you cannot change your circumstances, you essentially have two options. Option one is to admit when we're wrong and work on ourselves and try to become stronger. But option two is to convince ourselves that our weakness is actually a virtue and that the strong are actually the evil ones. And in Nietzsche's eyes, those who choose the second operate on slave morality. The person with slave morality looks at someone confident, successful, and powerful and thinks that they must be corrupt and cruel because they had to have cheated someone somewhere, because nobody gets success through honest means. And this is ressentiment at work. It is not a rational assessment, but a psychological coping mechanism. Because if the successful person earned their success through genuine ability, then the resentful person would have to confront their own inadequacy. And that is simply unbearable. Now, Dostoevsky understood this as well. In Notes from Underground, he created a character who embodies slave morality so completely that it is almost painful to read. The underground man is intelligent, educated, and utterly powerless. And he knows that he's powerless. And he convinces himself that his powerlessness is actually superior. He's too intelligent, sensitive, and too aware to succeed in the vulgar world of action. And the successful people around him are just too stupid to realize how meaningless their success is. Now, this is the same mechanism as the nice guy. They say, I am too nice for this world, and that women simply don't appreciate the good men. The underground man doesn't admit that he's afraid to act. He frames his paralysis as philosophical sophistication. And the nice guy does not admit that he lacks confidence. He frames his timidity as moral superiority. And this is where slave morality becomes truly insidious. It's not that it just redefines our own weakness as strength, but it actually redefines strength as weakness. Nietzsche saw this most clearly in Christianity, which he called a slave religion. And before anyone gets upset, we have to understand what he meant. Now, Christianity, in Nietzsche's view, took all of the qualities of powerless, like meekness, humility, suffering, and self-denial, and declared them as virtues. Meanwhile, it took the qualities of the powerful, like pride, strength, assertiveness, and self-affirmation, and declared them as sins. Now, whether you agree with Nietzsche's critique of Christianity or not, the mechanism that he's describing shows up everywhere. The person who cannot succeed in business convinces themselves that success is morally corrupt, and the person who can't attract a partner convinces himself that attractive people are simply shallow. And the person who lacks courage convinces themselves that brave people are simply reckless. It is a complete inversion of values driven by one single thing: the inability to admit powerlessness. Max Schuler, a philosopher who studied under Nietzsche's influence, took this idea even further. He argued that resentment doesn't just affect individuals, but that it can infect entire cultures. When enough people adopt a slave morality, it becomes the dominant way of thinking. And suddenly, ambition becomes greed, confidence becomes arrogance, and success becomes evidence of moral failure. The entire culture starts operating on the principle that anyone who rises above the rest must have done something wrong. Now, Kierkegaard saw a version of this in what he called leveling. He noticed that modern society had developed a deep hostility toward anyone who stood out, not just the evil or corrupt, but anyone who achieved anything remarkable. The response was not to celebrate excellence, but instead to drag everyone down to the same level. Because when everyone is mediocre, no one has to confront their own mediocrity. And think about how this plays out in the online sphere. If someone achieves success or builds a business, creates something popular, or even becomes well known, the immediate response is a swarm of people trying to find something wrong with them. They have to be a fraud or privileged, and they have to have exploited someone. There is a desperate need to prove that their success is illegitimate. Because if it's legitimate, and they truly built their business from the ground up in a moral and ethical way, then what's our excuse? This is resentment operating at scale. The person with slave morality cannot stand to see someone else succeed because it reminds them of their own failure. So they don't just criticize, they make it into a moral issue. They turn the successful person into a villain. Because if success requires being evil, then failure suddenly becomes a badge of honor. And we get to say, I could succeed if I wanted to, if I were willing to compromise my values to do so. But here is what Nietzsche understood that makes this so wrong. That slave morality doesn't actually make us feel better. The underground man is miserable. The nice guy is miserable. The person consumed by resentment is poisoned by their own bitterness. They have constructed this elaborate moral framework to avoid confronting their own powerlessness. But it'll never leave. They've just added a layer of self-deprecation on top of it. La Rochefoucauld, the 17th century French philosopher, wrote, "Our virtues are most frequently but vices in disguise." Or, in other words, we lie to ourselves about our motivations. We convince ourselves that our cruelty is honest and our resentment is principle. The nice guy genuinely believes that he is nice, until the rejection forces him to confront that he was only nice because he wanted something. And the moment he didn't get it, the truth emerged. He wasn't moral, but transactional, and the transaction failed, so the performance of morality did as well. And this is the core delusion of slave morality. It confuses weakness with virtue. And the person who lacks power tells themselves that they are choosing not to pursue it. The nice guy is not noble for being rejected. He is just simply rejected. And it's something that we all have to go through in life. The person who achieves nothing is not morally superior to the person who achieves something. They've just achieved nothing. And convincing ourselves otherwise is the most profound form of self-deception. Nietzsche didn't hate weak people because they were weak. He hated that they disguised their weakness as a virtue and then poisoned everyone else with their resentment. Because slave morality does not stay individual. It spreads like a cancer. One person's resentment validates another's, and they form communities built on shared bitterness and shared hatred of anyone who reminds them of their own powerlessness. And those communities become echo chambers where weakness is celebrated and strength is condemned. The nice guy finds other nice guys who confirm his worldview. Women are shallow, confident men are assholes, and the game is rigged. But None of the communities are making each other stronger. None of it makes them happier or helps them to grow. It just makes their prison more comfortable. And the more comfortable the prison becomes, the less likely they are to ever leave it. So, with that said, thank you guys so much for watching. And as always, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And I'll see y'all next time.